GM, everyone. We are live, and I'm super excited because I think this is the first live we are doing from the SeedGov account, and also because today we are going to talk a lot about optimism, and everybody that knows me know that I'm a huge fan and supporter of optimism. And also today I will have once again the pleasure to interview Justine Lavande, Head of Governance at Optimism. Welcome, Justine. How are you?
Thank you. Hi everyone. I started doing these sessions with season 5 or season 4. I can't remember. But anyways, we've done a few.
Yeah, I think we started at season 5. I
Okay.
don't I'm not sure also, but it's always a pleasure to have you. And this is the first session that we are doing in English because the first ones it was in Spanish, but from SitGov we want to reach like a broader audience, so it's quite a challenge for us to do this in English, but we are super excited. And today we are going to, I mentioned, we are going to talk about optimism and what is happening through season 7 of governance. So before we start, I want if you can introduce yourself, Justin, a little bit for from everyone that doesn't know you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Justine. I also go by Lavande, and I'm the head of governance at the Optimism Foundation. I was the first hire, so the first person that didn't come from OP Labs at the foundation. So I've been there since it was nothing. Really, it was nothing when I joined. And I've been in crypto working on different things for a long time, and I've done a lot of research into the development of other DAOs, because what I still see, what I saw, is that different DAOs repeat the same mistakes, and that's slowing us down basically as an industry. So the place I always start when optimism needs to do something is, okay, well, what has everybody else done, and then what worked well, and then what didn't work. And so I say a lot, working in governance, we know what doesn't work. We have like a pretty good idea of what doesn't work, and then what we have to figure out is what does work, which is what nobody really knows.
And sure that Lavan wouldn't admit it, but to everyone in the audience, she's like the cornerstone of all the optimism governance system. So, yeah, let's start with the questions. Before like we start like deep diving into the optimism governance system, um, I hear that you mentioned a few times that you're always like talking and sharing knowledge with your peers from different DAOs. And this is like more a general type of question. Like, how do you see like right now is the current landscape of DAOs? Do you
Yeah.
feel that we've made some progress in terms of DAO management since the last year, or does everything feel more or less the same?
Yeah. Yeah, I do talk to basically all the other governance leads or heads of foundations or whatever their titles are at the other DAOs. Is like an initiative I started, which was also like, I don't want this vibe to be competitive. We just need to share information. One, this job is hard, so let's support each other. And then two, let's just share insights, because if one DAO figures it out, everyone's going to copy and paste it anyway. So it's like, this should be kind of like positive some dynamics. And then everybody got on board with that. So that's good. I think that DAOs have matured in a lot of ways. What I see now at Optimism, but also at the other DAOs that I am in close touch with, is like people going back to the basics and rethinking some of the kind of like fundamental. In crypto, we have this tendency, it's probably not constrained to crypto, but of just like copy paste. Like I think there was like an Aragon podcast the other day where they were talking about like everyone uses the governor contract because that's like what compound used a long time ago, and everybody just kind of like copy paste that into their system. And so I think a lot of what we've done is like optimize kind of like the copy pasted systems that we've had. And now what I see is like people going back to the basics and being like, let's like rethink this from the fundamentals. What is the purpose of governance? What are its goals? And then if we could rewrite or design the system from scratch, what would it look like? Which is like, we also at Optimism tend to do this like once a year and get very existential and just say like, wait, maybe we're wrong about everything. And if we could just like start from scratch, what would we do? And then what does that mean for like how we would change things? So we're a little bit like in the middle of that process now. And then we talk to other governance leads about these things, and we also talk to other people in other disciplines, like a lot of poli-sci professors, et cetera, because I think that's also a thing that we kind of in crypto, not just DAOs, underutilize, and we just kind of like learn things the hard way, and there's like people that have already figured these things out. And so it's like, what can we learn from governments and what can we learn from corporate governance? Even if it's like, again, learning what is wrong with those models, then we understand where we want the delta between what we're building and what's already been built to be.
And I think it's super valuable for all, let's say, the collective and all the like ecosystem, the DAO ecosystems in general, that you guys are doing like this kind of thing, that sharing knowledge and experience and everything, because I think we all want to push like the DAO system forward. So yeah, we need to trust each other and help each other to like to success, right?
Yeah,
So
and the truth
yeah,
is like no one has figured it out. So if one, like, I don't think it's competitive. Like if Arbitrum figures something out that we haven't been able to figure out and their DAO works amazingly, cool, we're gonna do it too. So it's like we all win. I don't know. It's silly. Yeah.
that's great. That's great. So Optimism season 7. Let's start with the fun part. So compared to previous seasons of governance, this one, like one of the major changes is that this season only has one single intent.
Yeah.
And I want to divide like the question in two parts, because can you first like explain a little bit what an intent is, and also what the intent is for this season, and why we are only have one intent this season.
Yeah. So an intent is basically just a goal. It's like the focus of the collective and what everybody should be working towards during that period of time, which is usually 6 months, which is a season for us. So it's basically just like, here's the target, and everybody can aim at it kind of in different ways or do different work that supports it. But this is what we're all trying to accomplish together. The reason the intent for season 7, oh, it's like, do I know it by heart? I think is like a set of stage 1 chains doing of interoperable stage 1 chains doing 250 million in cross-chain asset transfers, something like that. The point is it's related to interoperability and chains doing interoperable activity, basically. The reason that there's one, and I don't know if there will be one in the future, like it just was what we decided for this time, but as you know, things change frequently at Optimism. And before, for reference, I think one season we had 3 and one season we had 4. Anyways, been between 3 and 4. This was the first time that we tried to align the foundation, OP Labs, and other core developers and the DAO around the same goal, basically. So before it was like the DAO had intents, but then labs had their own goals and the foundation had their own goals, and like everyone's working in like slightly different directions, and it becomes chaotic and mismatched. And so it was a big effort behind the scenes to get foundation and labs to use the intent framework, basically, and then to have us all working towards the same thing. So I think honestly, for this first round of doing that, it was just the benefit is like a focus, to just have one and get everybody focused on one thing. Like startups and DAOs have the opposite problem, where they usually just like can't focus. They focus on too many things, or they're trying to do 25, like reach 25 goals at once. And so it's like, all right, let's simplify this as much as possible and let's focus on one thing. And if the future it makes sense, or we feel like we're able to focus on two or three, then we'll do that. But for the first kind of like unification of everybody, it was just like a lot cleaner to have everyone focus on one thing. And then I also think, like, just realistically, everyone's just trying to ship interop. So it's just like the priority over everything else. So it was like naturally.
And one perception I have, and I want to ask you if you like feel the same, is that this season I feel like there is like no kind of noise, for example, in the forum,
Mm.
and it's like a lot of people, they are really like focusing on this intent and this single goal we have, and it's like there is like I mentioned, no noise. Everybody is focused on this thing. And do you think like focusing only on one thing? And I know like interrupt is like our top priority right now, but what do you think about that? It was like possible to have like another initiatives, or it was like a good time to put a stop to other initiatives and really focus on this thing like interrupt?
Yeah. In So I think there's like a lot of reasons for that. Like so it's hard to attribute, like, is it related to the intent? Is it related to the fact that Token House is like 2 or 2.5 years old, and like normally at a 2 year mark you just see like activity engagement, like it's not like new and shiny anymore and people move on and do other things. That's normal. Um, yeah, so there could be like a lot of reasons for it, but I think in general there's a lot of like distractions usually in DAOs, and the weakness is historically to try to do too many different things at once and then end up doing nothing well, really. And so if we have to err on one of those sides, I would rather err on like everyone's focused on one thing. The downside of that approach is going to be like maybe you lose some of the benefits of emergence, right? Like somebody could have like a very initiative that would drive a lot of sequencer revenue that's like completely outside of what anyone else is thinking about, and we could miss that. I would actually love to do research on this, but I don't know how real that benefit is versus hypothetical. And then the other thing is, if somebody did have an idea like that, it would probably get brought to attention. Like there'd probably be a lot of conversation around it, and it would get like in front of people, and then it would probably be possible to support that. But yeah, I think in general there's just like less activity right now. We have been DAOs in the past have really struggled with not being scoped, right? They're like using the treasury to support things that have really nothing to do with the business of what the DAO is trying to support. And so like we probably have erred on the side of being like potentially over scoped, but the downsides seemed less with that approach, but they exist. There are downsides for sure.
Awesome, awesome. So one thing we are hearing a lot from Optimism right now is interop. Interop is like the next big thing, and like it's like interwoven with the superchain concept.
Mhm.
So why it is so essential for the success of the superchain that we ship interop?
Yeah. Yeah. So you're probably all familiar with this, but like when I joined Foundation, and probably when most of you started using Optimism, it was just like OP mainnet, and the goal was to scale Ethereum. And then the founders realized, like, oh, we're not going to scale Ethereum with one chain. Basically, we cannot reach Visa level transaction or like internet scale with one chain. So we need to have multiple chains, and this is where the super chain concept came from. The problem with that is that you scale, but it's fragmented, and the user experience is like, I don't know if you all have had tried to use different chains in the super chain, but like it's it's a fragmented user experience right now that takes like a really long time to do things, and it's pretty painful. And so the idea behind interop is that you can use any of these chains and it feels like one chain for the user. It's also important because it's possible that a chain like Base, for example, might need multiple chains depending on the scale that they reach. And so you don't want to have like Base A, Base B, Base C. You just want it to feel all like one chain for the Base user. I'm just using them as an example. So that's where you also start to build within the superchain thesis, like the network effects between the chains, and like you're not fragmenting liquidity, et cetera, et cetera. And so the superchain it's not really real until we have interop. And so that's why everybody's so focused on it, because then it makes that vision and that value prop and those network effects real.
And with the arrival of the super chain and interop, many OP chains are beginning to participate in Optimism's governance system, and really it's super like exciting to see the new post of these chains, like, hey, we are delegates now, we are going to we will love to participate in these systems.
Yeah.
And there is, for example, a program that is the chain delegation program, and I wondered if you can briefly say to us what consists this program, and yeah, how this program helps to the chains to join and participate the Optimism governance system.
Yeah. So the OP chains are all very impacted by the decisions that Optimism governance makes. And that's because one of the main things governance is responsible for is protocol upgrades. So that really directly impacts the infrastructure that they're running their business on. And then two, to be in the super chain, the chains contribute like 15% or some other definition. Okay, they contribute some amount of revenue to the collective treasury, which then governance makes decisions about. And so when we think about governance participants, we think about them in terms of like who is incentive aligned, who is knowledgeable, and then who is impacted by the decisions. And so the chains are all three of those things, but they're really very impacted by the decision. And so it makes sense that they should be involved in making the decisions that impact them. That being said, a lot of them are like new, depending, right? Like we have OP chains like Sony, and then we have other OP chains like Unichain that are like not new to governance, but some of them are very new to governance. And so we're not sure exactly how they're going to participate, and it might look very different, like for a Unichain versus a Sony versus a Kraken. We created this chain delegation program, though, to like help chains get involved and get on board into governance. The chain also has a cap on the delegation amount, which just means that it's more applicable to chains that that didn't receive huge partner fund grants to join the super chain, and therefore they are very interested in making sure that they have influence over decision making and that they're not like outweighed by some of the bigger chains, basically. So what the program does is it reserved 20 million OP from the governance fund. The governance fund has like 138 or something like that million OP that haven't been used yet. And so it's just taking some of those tokens that are otherwise sitting there doing nothing, and it delegates up to 1.5 million to like the first 20 or something chains that qualify. And to qualify, you need to be on the standard charter, and then you can get more delegation if you generate a certain amount of if you contribute a certain amount of revenue and have a certain number of transactions happening on your chain. And then it allows us to kind of like walk them through the onboarding process. So we have meetings with them and we tell them how to set up their delegate profile and like and then we send them their first delegation, and they need to maintain 70% participation to keep that delegation for the first year, and then it goes away. And the idea is it just bootstraps their ability to participate. So we give them temporary delegation, but in the year period, they need to be trying to build their own organic delegation that will replace that when it goes away. And then like we have them in a group chat and we tell them, hey, this vote's happening. Like we just kind of like handhold them a little bit with the idea that after a year, like they kind of know what they're doing and they don't need us to do that anymore. But yeah, the point is to get as many chains involved as possible, and a lot of those will be kind of like smaller or newer chains.
And with these new chains that are involved in governance right now, I think there is like a super dynamic new situation. And I want to ask you if do you think like it's maybe a concern or not that the how is the power of 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 these chains versus stakeholders or delegates, it's going to be like balance because well, considering that the chain delegation program, they receive a delegation, and right now with and I think with any amount, they instantly became a top 100 delegate.
Mhm.
So, do you think like that would represent like a problem in the future, or it's like balance? We can say it's a balanced situation.
Yeah, so we have to think about voting power distribution and how to balance that with or without chains, right? Like that's a problem that blows up a bunch of DAOs. Is that the token distribution becomes really unbalanced, and it doesn't matter really what stakeholder it is, but there's some stakeholder that can block everything or whatever. And so we think about it in a few different ways. One is like balancing voting power distribution within the token house. And we have someone who's a strategic delegation lead that thinks a lot about this. We have different like concentration of power metrics that we monitor. We have like a voting health dashboard that we monitor. We had a contributor make like votable supply targets that say, okay, once we're at this amount of votable supply, you can take off this guardrail and you're going to reach this decentralization milestone, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a problem that we think about a lot. Optimism governance probably looks like, actually, most governance probably looks like trying to balance power between 50 participants more so than it does distributing that power among millions. And that kind of makes sense because there's not that many people that have that meet the three kind of like voting participation criteria. It's not really a criteria that I mentioned before, which is they have the knowledge to understand what they're voting on. They have the incentives to make decisions that are in the collective interest and not to benefit personal agendas. And then they're actually impacted by the decision. So those are kind of like the three things that should be present in like your governance participants. And so that there's probably not millions of people that fall into that category. It's probably a smaller group. And then you want to balance power among them. One thing that no other DAO has done that I think is a cool concept that we're not going to implement anytime soon, but if you think about how they do portfolio rebalancing, I have a finance background, you could do something similar, different, with like the voting power distribution, where you could basically like have a mechanism that monitors that and says like, oh, okay, if any one token holder has more than whatever 25% voting power, trigger this event, which could be like a delegation decay or delegation reset or at like marketing to have everybody reassess their delegate, or like there's different things that you can do kind of formulaically that would like auto rebalance that. Or it could be like, oh, shift this like pile of reserve tokens to pro rata distribute among like all the other delegates or something like this, which I think is like a really interesting concept. We call it like a balancing function. You could do it in the citizens house also, where maybe for some votes you want like to have an even sampling of people from of representatives from chains, apps, and users or something, and then you can balance it in the way that you sample from the population.
Awesome, awesome. And speaking about delegates, yesterday I saw a really interesting post that I don't remember if the main Optimism account of the Optimism Gov shared, and it's about a foundation mission request about creating an AI delegate. So could you tell us a little bit more about this initiative and what its goal is?
Yeah. So the RFP is just to have different teams try to develop an model or an AI agent that understands optimism governance. So can look at a proposal and say, this violates the law of chains, or this violates this policy, or here's the impact of this on the collective interest, or this would advantage the proposer over some other party, and have like that level of understanding. We're ambivalent to whether that's a tool that existing delegates use or whether that becomes like an autonomous agent that then people delegate towards. I don't think there's like a huge distinction between those two things, but I think that's definitely the future of governance and a lot of things. But a lot of decision making will be algorithmic or either done by AI agents or humans that are using those agents.
But do you believe like in the future there are going to be like, for example, like a really AI agent that people will delegate for him or she to take decision for them? Like it's possible, do you think?
If if they can, yeah, if it can be like accurate, and there's different ways you can think about it, right? You can assess the agent's ability on like comprehension or ability to understand the nuance of optimism governance, or um, you can have it. What other DAOs or other experiments I've seen is more of like representing certain values. I don't know. I don't know which direction it will go in. The thing that's interesting, you could also have a third version of this, which is like what's interesting to me is that a lot of the people who would theoretically be the best governance participants, meaning they have the highest amount of knowledge or they're most impacted by the decisions or they're developers or their work at the chains, don't have time to participate in governance because they're building whatever they're building, and the builders have the most context, or theoretically like kind of the most credibility to participate, but they can't. And so you could also have like an agent that's trained by those people. Say you have like an agent that's trained by the developer advisory board or whatever, or by a group of the chain so that it votes like a chain would vote, but then the chains don't have to spend their time doing that. So I don't know exactly like what it's going to look like, but I do think it will go strongly in this direction, right? Whether it's a tool that humans use or it's autonomous agents that become delegates and make decisions themselves, and then like whether it's just on comprehension, whether it's on values or whether it's like specifically trained to represent stakeholders that otherwise can't participate. I'm not sure, but I think directionally going there.
Yeah, it sounds like a super crazy and fun experiment.
Yeah,
So
I mean that's why it's like an experiment. Also, we're also not sure like how accurate or like how well any of these things will actually function. So this is what we're gonna find out.
awesome, awesome. Before we continue, I have a brief announcement. We have a PO-up for everyone that came to this live. You can go to the PO-up app and go to the section of secret word. And the secret word for claiming your PO-up is optimism governance, all together without any space. And it's going to be available like half an hour, so you have time. But just remember that go to a POAP app, a secret word, and the secret word is optimism governance all together. Okay. Um, Last year, Foundation introduced this concept of working models for decentralization. And I remember super well that you mentioned that this is not a roadmap,
Mm.
it's like a living plan to guide the collective toward decentralization. And I want to ask you if you can tell us about this like model, how it works, and when we might see some updates from it.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have decentralization milestones, and then we have like a system diagram. And I designed both of them. It's really hard to know what things are going to look or what the exact path is, right? We don't have examples. We don't really know. We have a guess of what things might look like, but then each season we learn, and then we have to update our thinking and change. And so it's hard to strike a balance between giving the community insight into what the vision is and what the path looks like, and make some commitments that, like, yeah, we do have a plan for this, and then balance that with like, but this is not exactly what it's going to look like, and like this is probably going to change, and we're probably wrong about a lot of things. And I actually think that initially I wanted to share those things like 6 months earlier than we did, but I think there was hesitation internally to like put something out and like be wrong about something and look like we didn't know what we were doing or look silly or whatever. And then it's like, anyways, we realized that you just have to put it out. And if it's wrong, it's wrong. And you just have to do a good job of explaining that it's like all subject to change. So this happens a lot in my role, where people will say, Justine, what does such and such look like in season 11? And I'm like, I mean, can we launch the thing in season 9 first and then like see how it goes? But at the same time, I understand that they want to understand like what the general kind of progression might look like. So we lay it out to the best of our ability, and then like we'll update it in public as we go. We put a post on the forum, I can find it and send it, where we highlighted all the milestones that are being worked towards in season 7, and then linked the things that are like related to that milestone. I feel pretty confident that we're making good progress on all of those things. It's something that we track internally. We were going to do an update on it at the midpoint of the season, which I think was last week. So I actually, when I saw the questions for this, then I added it to my to-do list. So we can provide an update, but like I can pretty confidently say like there is a work stream or something that is being done for like each of those milestones we're making progress towards. And then we're going to introduce I don't know, we're probably going to change the name, but we've referred to it in the past as a budget board in season 8. And then that will bring us much closer to a lot of the milestones in the like economic layer, which is the least developed one. So yeah, we're working towards it. And it is a framework that we use internally. It's not like something we published and then forgot about.
Awesome. And another question I have, and I know you are not in charge of retrofunding, that Jonas is in charge of that, but retrofunding evolved a lot from past rounds to what retrofunding is right now. And maybe you can give us some context, because I know most of our audience and builders are always super interested in get to know how they can like contribute to the collective and benefit from retrofunding,
Yeah.
and how retrofunding looks right now in season 7.
Yeah. So the idea behind the changes made in season 7 was to like lean into this like metrics based approach, reduce the overhead for voters who are being asked to evaluate like 900 projects that they had never seen before. So there's like 2 things we're always trying to get closer towards with retrofunding. One is the ability to measure things well, to measure impact well. And that's something that we'll need to do kind of like all over the collective. I always refer to this part of retrofunding as like, we need a really good ruler. Like we need to be able to measure anything and everything and understand what the impact was in order to make budgeting decisions, in order to manage the treasury well, in order to know what the grants council budget should be, in order to know if the grants council versus retrofunding versus the foundation growth team versus futarchy is working better or worse than the other. And then obviously like we need to measure what retrofunding measures, which is like the impact generated by builders and in this season developer tooling, and how that generates value for the super chain. So that's one thing, and that's what we're trying to get closer towards with like this metrics driven approach. And the second thing is like the user experience for builders that are rewarded by retro funding. And in the past, that's been really bad because the rounds were really infrequent or like changed a ton between them, and then the payouts were also just like very infrequent. And so by kind of defining the algorithm up front, it creates more predictability for builders. And then there's also like monthly payouts now. So those are kind of like the two things that we're always trying to improve in retro funding. And I know Jonas is already thinking about season 8. And I don't know exactly what it will look like, but I know that those will, like, the changes that are made will be in pursuit of those two goals.
Awesome, awesome. I'm seeing one question from the Twitter,
Mhm.
because we are also live on Twitter. And Lucas asked if any updates on season 7 on-chain builders retro funding rewards. I think I saw Julian mention this in the governor's chat, that rewards are going to start rolling this Thursday, but I'm not 100% sure. So
I don't have the exact date because I don't run this program, but it's soon. I know that.
yeah, yeah, great, great. And something I always highlight about optimism is that this collective always try to innovate and iterate a lot. And a few weeks ago, we had this amazing experiment about futarchy that you recently mentioned. Could you like tell us a little bit about what this experiment was, and why exactly optimism is choosing to experiment with alternative mechanisms for grants?
Yeah. So we think about governance questions in three categories. One is measurement, which is retro funding, which is like things that can be very metrics driven and are quantifiable, mathy types of questions. Uh, then there's predictions, where it's like things that we can't measure. Like we have to make a guess about what will be useful or about what we should do. And then hopefully we can measure if we were right after the fact. And then there are some questions that are just about values, and only a human can answer that, and there's no right or wrong answer. So there's like the three type of decisions governance has to make. That's how we categorize things. So we're doing a lot of work with retro funding to make measurement very data driven. It's also like more scalable, it's more governance minimized, et cetera. The way that we make predictions is not that way. And most DAOs have explored one way to make predictions, which is like there's a council of experts that make those predictions. And it can be about strategy, or it can be about grants, or it can be about what to do with the treasury, et cetera. And so I'm always talking to a lot of people, and people are always telling me their governance ideas. And so a bunch of people had mentioned futarchy to me. And then a lot of times when people pitch me ideas or concepts, I'm like, okay, that's interesting, but like what you've just described to me is like a solution, and I don't have a problem that it maps to yet. And so, but then it's like in my mind, and then a problem will come up, and I'm like, maybe futarchy is a way to do this. Maybe this solution maps to like this problem that I'm looking at now. And so that's kind of what happened, is that we wanted to evaluate futarchy as a way to make predictions. The Grants Council makes predictions, algorithms make predictions. So there's different ways to make predictions. And so the idea behind the experiment was like, let's understand the different properties of these different ways to make predictions, and then figure out which one is best for what type of prediction, basically. So it's not necessarily like, is futarchy better than the Grants Council? It's like, what is different about futarchy in making this decision than a council of experts, basically. And we're still like, the experiment's not over, so I can't I can't like draw the conclusions yet. But the idea is not like, okay, now all of a sudden everything's futarchy. This is like typical what DAOs would do in the past. They would like do an experiment with futarchy. People would be excited about it. They would be like, yes, let's put futarchy everywhere. Then they would put it in places where it shouldn't be. And then they would say, oh, futarchy doesn't work. And then they would get rid of all of it. So we're trying to not do that.
Okay, that's awesome. So The experiment is like currently still running, and I think we are going to see like the final results in mid-June.
Yeah.
Um, we we are also going to see like a reflection from the foundation about the experiment.
Yeah. Yeah. So, a few things that we can say so far, just based on what we've observed, is that the projects selected by the Grants Council and by the market had high overlap. So,
Mm.
3 of the 5 were the same. And then what we did was like, we're not going to give 2 grants to a project. So, the Grants Council just gave grants to the runners up, basically. But there was high overlap in the selection. We know that the estimates for change in TVL from the prediction market are high relative to the project's own estimate of the change. We think that might have something to do with the fact that we used play money in this experiment. So there was no downside, basically. And it had to be that way in V1 at least. What's interesting is that Uniswap, we partnered with them on designing this experiment. And so they're going to run a version of it and they're going to use real money. So we can look at the differences in behavior and participation and draw some non-scientific conclusions about what impact play money had. And then it will be I think the other thing that was interesting that we've seen already was we had like a hypothesis that the people most likely to participate in the market would be, or in the experiment would be optimism, like people already involved in optimism governance. That's not what we saw. Actually, we had like 431 unique addresses or non-Sybil addresses participate. And I'm not going to remember the exact number, but like 15%, something like that, had attestations. So actually, the majority of participants were not people like highly involved in optimism governance, which was super interesting. And then we need to wait for Uniswap to run their experiment, and then for the like measurement of actual change in TVL to happen in June to like draw any more conclusions. But everyone inside the foundation is very excited and asking me what V2 looks like. And I keep saying we don't know yet because the experiment hasn't ended. But I'm pretty confident there will be a V2. And then I'm trying to calm everybody down so we can do like a proper analysis and not just like go with like biased conclusions that we already had before we did the experiment, and like I'm trying to not get ahead of ourselves.
You answered the follow-up question that I have if we are going to have a B2. So
Yeah.
I will consider that an alpha from this from this live.
Yeah, I don't know what it will look like, but yes, I imagine that we continue to experiment with it.
Awesome, awesome. We have another question from the chat, and it's again related to retrofounding, but I will be completely honest with you because the point about the the question, I didn't read the article, so maybe you didn't read it also. Eliza asked, "How do you see the future retrofunding with the latest post of Vitalik and the idea of funding open source project?"
I think this is in reference to deep funding. I'm not sure, but deep funding is an experiment, an initiative that Vitalik is a part of or supportive of, which is similar to retro funding, or is like based on concepts of retro funding and takes a slightly different approach. So basically, there's this concept of a value chain, which is a concept we've talked about for a long time, or like a dependency graph. I think you can call it either thing. But it's basically like a map of how much value or impact different parts of the open source stack, right? Not the OP stack, but the open source stack, generate for other parts of the system. And then you can kind of start to quantify impact throughout the whole value chain. And so that's what they're basically doing. They're having an algorithm, basically like, okay, they're assigning weights to different parts of the value chain, and then they're having basically like an algorithm extrapolate that or approximate that. And so they're making algorithmic, like the human judgment part is my understanding. I'm not an expert. Jonas is an expert in this. And so I think it's like a similar approach to ours in a way, but it's the implementation is different in important ways, and that it is really kind of like making the human judgment part is still really strong part of that mechanism, whereas we're leaning more into like reducing that part and leaning into the data. I would imagine, like, Jonas has studied that very closely, and so I would imagine in season 8 is informed, the design for season 8 is informed by the deep funding experiment. But it's super interesting, and it's also cool that to see other people taking different approaches to try to accomplish the same thing. And then an important part of that concept in that post is the goal to fund open source projects, which is still the goal of retro funding. Our scope is just limited now to on-chain builders and dev tooling, basically limited to the things that we can measure, like, as best we can, right? It's hard to measure those things still, but like it's easier to measure those things than other things. But the goal is still to kind of like add like slivers of contributions over time. But what we realize what we're trying to do is like quantify impact for everything and doing like a okay job at it. And we thought, okay, what would probably make more sense is just like get really good at measuring or quantifying impact for like 2 things, and then add like a third thing, get really good at that, and then add it's kind of basics, but sometimes we miss it. And so that's the approach that we're taking now. Get good at 2 things, and then add the third, and then add the fourth, and then add the fifth.
Awesome, awesome. We have one last question, and it's from Alex, one of our governors. And Alex asks, how could we define the next intent in a more participatory way if it's a decision based on values?
Yeah, it's strategy setting. So I don't know if it's more of a prediction actually than a values thing, right? So values would be like, how important is, what multiplier should be on open source? Like, how important is open source to the collective? The intent is like, what are we aiming the entire business at? Like, what do we think will generate sequencer revenue? Or, I mean, that might not be the only goal of the intent, but what do we think will generate the most positive impact for the entire collective? And typically that is what we call a convex decision. So it's Vitalik's framework that I borrowed and adapted, but there's a framework for thinking about a concave decision, which is a decision that benefits from the wisdom of the crowds. So like the typical example of this is like, how many jelly beans are in this jar? If you have a lot of people guess and then take the average, you'll get very close to what the actual number is. A convex decision is like the opposite, and it does not benefit from the wisdom of the crowds. You'll make a worse decision when you use the wisdom of the crowds. And that's because basically it's a thing where a compromise, like taking an average, will get you to a worse answer, essentially. And so strategy in general is a convex decision. Setting the intent is a convex decision. And so what you usually want to do is delegate that decision to experts or to data. And so the intent kind of falls into that category. Right. That's why right now it's done by the foundation, who is theoretically at least the highest context in building the superchain and the business strategy and talking to the partners every day, et cetera. In the future, we need to get to a place where there are parties that are able to compete with the foundation in that way, but have like a similar level of context. So the way that the decision can reflect more inputs, basically, like there can be more inputs into that process from partners and users and app developers and like participants in the system, but it should still be proposed by basically like a delegated set of experts, at least using our like decision making framework that we use.
Awesome, awesome. And we're reaching our time schedule. Before we close this live, I want to remember everyone in the audience that you can claim a POAP for being here and hearing all Justin's knowledge about optimism. So you can go to the POAP app, go to the secret word section, and the secret word is optimism governance all together. And it's going to be available for 5 more minutes. So hurry up. So thank you very much, Justine, for being here. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and get to know you more and your ideas about optimism governance. And I'm sure that this is not going to be the last one. So see you again in season 8.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you guys. And with that, we are closing this live. We will see you on the next one. Have a great rest of the day and of the week. See you. Bye bye.